following snippets of the news from Hong Kong, and I'm paying very close attention to this because I think this is really a turning point, even more so than the umbrella protests in 2014. The latest is that tensions have calmed down a bit. There was some violence um, between demonstrators and the police, but here's the thing: the people of Hong Kong are being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. I don't think that any violence from demonstrators, if that is indeed the case, rather than police's heavy-handed tactics, I don't think it's the right way to go forward. But who am I to question the anger that they feel? I mean, this is literally a fight for freedom. You know, it's not a demonstration about one specific thing. Yes, it's about the extradition bill, but this is actually about a much bigger thing than that. This is the extradition bill is just another example of Beijing's blatant agenda of violating the Sino-British Joint Declaration, discarding Hong Kong's autonomy, and paving way to get rid of the one party, one country, two systems situation. Um, Carrie Lam has shown herself to be a weak leader. She's a puppet of Beijing and she should resign. Um, I think if it wasn't for the fact we were so tied up with Brexit, this is one of my frustrations with the whole Brexit situation. We get so distracted by it. We are absolutely focused on this right now. I think Sajid Javid today in his leadership bid was right to say that the public care about other things as well. Um, I mean, I know that a Foreign Office minister, I think the guy's name is Mark Field, condemned what Beijing is doing here. But frankly, and with all due respect to that minister, this needs to be going to the top levels. This needs to be Jeremy Hunt and Theresa May in her last weeks as Prime Minister. And whoever is going to be our next Prime Minister, whether it be Boris Johnson or Jeremy Hunt, I think it's going to be one of those two. Um, they need to be making it very clear they're going to stand up to Beijing. I think, frankly, at this point, we should be giving an ultimatum to the Chinese: change their behaviour, or we will recall the ambassador. I really think there is credence to do that. I mean, they, even if you disregard the human rights factor, which is a very important thing, even if you put that to the side, there's legal issues here. There is international rule of law. There is the fact that China has broken something they signed up to. They're treaty breakers. So that in itself, even leaving aside the obvious liberty and human rights issues, should be enough to take issue with them. But why are we being so meek about this? I want to see the British government showing a bit more backbone when it comes to Beijing. A lot more, in fact. We can send out a message at the very least by not going ahead with this Huawei deal. The security issue is a big one, but it would also send a message to Beijing: you can't push us around. You can't just threaten us to accept these sort of trade deals. I believe, I'm not going to pretend I'm neutral on this. I hate the Chinese government. I think they're a rotten, callous, cowardly, cruel, dishonest, nasty regime. I really have utter contempt for them. But unfortunately, because of the sort of methods that they use and the sort of indoctrination that they use on the mainland, many young Chinese, mainland Chinese, think that if you attack the Communist Party, then you're attacking China, the country. China's an ancient country. You know, it's a lot more than the Communist Party, but unfortunately, the Communist Party does have absolute power at the moment. I think the only way that there is some backdraft against the communist regime is if the world and other governments start matching the courage of these young demonstrators and stand up to Beijing. I don't think that Donald Trump can be relied on for it. Mike Pompeo, I like some of the statements Mike Pompeo has made in his support for human rights in China and North Korea. But the president, I don't think Donald Trump can be relied on this. His response to this was, I'm sure they'll work something out. Very weak response. Typical Trump. Trump sees everything through the prism of a business deal. We're talking about liberty and freedom here. Um, and I really, really, I find it frustrating. I can't imagine the frustration and the fear that people in Hong Kong feel about the way this is going, um, there is some cause for optimism. Number one, the fact that so many of the demonstrators are young shows that it's going to be almost impossible for the communist regime to indoctrinate people in Hong Kong the way they have on the mainland. I don't think they can try as much as they want, but young people in Hong Kong know what's going on here, and they're not going to tolerate that. It may work on the mainland, it won't work in Hong Kong. Number two, God forbid if, let's say, Xi Jinping decided to override executive authority in Hong Kong and just totally disregard one nation, two systems, and God forbid go for a Tiananmen style crackdown. I don't think even Xi Jinping would risk that. I mean, I think he's callous enough to do it. He's a dictator. I don't think he would have any moral issues around it. But from a practical point of view, the world's a lot more linked up than it was in 1989. In 1989, it was regular news networks that were covering Tiananmen Square, and there were many, many reports on the ground from citizen journalists there. But that didn't have the sort of effect of being sent around the globe in the same way that it would today. Social media is incredibly powerful in these sort of aspects. So let's say, for the sake of argument, I'm not saying this will happen, but let's say that Xi Jinping decided to override Carrie Lam's authority, sent in the PLA to Hong Kong. Um, there would definitely be bloodshed because the Hong Kongers would understandably be furious about that. Then the PLA would say, they would probably open fire. The authorities there have already fired rubber bullets. So this is a very volatile situation. But if that happened, then the level of anger against China, I think and I hope, would be such that it wouldn't be just a couple of years of sanctions that China would have to go back on. It would be much deeper. It would really polarize China. Of course, the likes of Russia and other countries that have no respect for human rights would either back China or be on the fence. But I would hope that if something like that happened, God forbid, the anger against Beijing would be such that they would find themselves polarized. And I think if that was to happen, God forbid, but if it was, every self respecting liberal democracy should recall their Chinese ambassador, polarize this bullying regime. And to those who think that China is a victim, you're deluded. Really, that might have been true in the 19th century. It's not the case today. China is a very powerful country, and this really is a David and Goliath situation. So I back the people of Hong Kong 100%. Um, I hope there isn't more violence, and I don't think that demonstrators should use violence. But the reports I've seen is that this was just the straw that broke the camel's back. Um, this is literally a fight for freedom. It's not unrest over one specific issue. It's a lot more than the extradition bill. This is literally a fight for freedom, and the Hong Kongers see what's happening. They see an arrogant totalitarian regime in Beijing trying to erode their freedoms. I mean, this is far, far more profound um, than in my view, what we're seeing in the UK. I don't like the European Union, but it's not comparable to the Chinese Communist Party. And anyone who thinks it is frankly deluded. Um, we need to be backing the Hong Kongers, not just a junior minister. I want to see it from the Foreign Secretary. I want Jeremy Hunt in his leadership pitch to say, I'm going to stand up to China. I want Boris Johnson to say that. I want Dominic Raab to say that. I want Sajid Javid to say that. Whichever of these people gets to the top, they need to show that they have the backbone to stand up to China. And it does take courage, even for a politician, because China is a very powerful country. But we need to show that we can stand up to Beijing. We just need to do it. I mean, I am frustrated at the passiveness that we are showing on this. There's some muted criticism. It's not enough. It really is not enough.